Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen-Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. I am very excited to tell you that our guest on today's show is Deborah LaGrasse. She has one amazing journey, and I am so glad you get to hear it through this interview. Deborah, thank you for spending so much time to let me get to know you. It was inspiring to hear how big of a role you have played in spreading knowledge of iron casting as an artistic material. I think that the influence you and Charles put in has really caused this movement to slingshot forward as much as it has, and it's just so obvious to me now that I know what really happened through your recollections. I also want to say that witnessing how your artistic practice and different work developed throughout the years was very interesting and informational. You are a very good role model for me to have, and I will keep your advice in mind probably for the rest of my life as I too move through different stages of my life, artistic career, and art making. But enough about me and hearing how what Deborah has told us changed my life. Let's get on with the show. The Podcast Iron Show is sponsored in part by individual supporters on Patreon. So yes, that's about 20 of our friends, colleagues, iron casting artists. So thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of keeping the show going. And I also would like to thank the top supporters of our show, which are the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance, Sloss Metal Arts, and I'm sure you'll remember how excited I was last month to announce that we have a new top supporter, and that is Crescent Creative. Crescent Creative is a digital design and fabrication studio located in Birmingham, Alabama. They utilize CNC router technology to produce foundry patterns, outdoor signage, furniture, and public art commissions. If you have questions, they have solutions. You can find them on Instagram at Crescent Creative. Check them out and give them a follow. They are always up to creating interesting and artistic custom designs for their customers, and I love seeing their projects pop up on my Instagram feed. Thank you so much, Crescent Creative, for becoming a top sponsor. Your support really means so much to us. Another top supporter of the show is the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance, and they are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that consists of iron casting artists in the western states of the U.S. Their organization's goals are to educate, demonstrate, and exhibit cast iron art in the western region of the U.S. And one way they accomplish this goal is by organizing a conference every 2 years. So start planning to come out west for the conference in fall of 2024. Typically at the beginning of October is when it comes around, but not always. So just keep your ear on the ground. Obviously, there are no solid dates this far in advance, but I'll keep you informed when things start to develop. Rumor has it that the 2024 Western Conference will be in San Diego, California. And I just want to point out that you don't have to live in the West to attend the Western Conference. You should definitely make the trip. They'll love to have you. A big thanks to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance and their board members for their support of this podcast. For more information about this fantastic organization, visit their website, which is wciaa.org. Another top supporter of this show is Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. Based in Birmingham, Alabama, they host our national conference on contemporary cast iron art and practices every 2 years. So to keep up to date on the conference-related things, follow NCCCIAP on Instagram, but also follow Sloss Metal Arts on Instagram and TikTok, and they'll keep you up to date on all things Sloss-related and conference-related. Besides the national conference, Sloss also has an entire schedule including cast iron bowl making events, and the foundry is available to be rented out if you want to bring your class there to hold an event or to have a corporate event with their artists. So for more information about the Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com. Also, they're currently accepting applications for their fall visiting artist in residence, and the deadline for this is August 25th. But all of the information is on their website, so check it out and share it with people who you think might be interested because the deadline is coming up. Thank you, Sloss Metal Arts. And one more thing before we get into the interview, I just want to mention an upcoming opportunity for the display of your large outdoor artwork. The city of O'Fallon, Missouri hosts a rotating sculpture series called The Shape of Community. And The Shape of Community is a citywide sculpture exhibition featuring large-scale works of art in prominent areas throughout the city, which are loaned by artists for an 18-month period of time. Currently, there are 10 works installed, and you can see more details about that on their website. For those of you who are watching the video version of this, you can see that I have the web address on the bottom of the screen right here, but the link will be in the show notes and all the description boxes. And if you're listening to this audio only version and you don't have access to all of that, the easiest way to get on their website is when you get to a computer or your phone, Google The Shape of Community, O'Fallon, Missouri. When you do visit their website, you will see that the cast iron art community is very well represented in the group of 10 sculptures presently installed. So you, my friend, have got a good shot. Presently, we're less than a year out on the time frame for this call for submissions, and they will be jurying your entries in early March of 2024. So start thinking about what piece from your catalog you would like to apply with, or even make a new piece for your deadline. You've got plenty of time. And if you have any detailed questions about this opportunity, please contact the Cultural Arts Coordinator of O'Fallon, Missouri, and that is Martin Linson. And his email address is mlinson@o'fallon.mo.us. And this is a great outlet for iron casting artists to showcase all the big, heavy metal works we've been casting. So finally, let's get into this conversation with Deborah LaGrasse. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please enjoy. Deborah LaGrasse, welcome to the show today. Thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Thank you, Laura. It's really sweet of you to do this. I think it's very important for artists, sculptors, and the iron community going forward.
I'm glad that you were game for this. And so let's just get started with our typical first question, which is, well, Deborah, who the hell are you anyways?
Well, my name is Deborah LaGrasse. I was born in Central Florida, and I reside in North Florida. I'm an artist and a sculptor for over 40 years. I taught equally in both architecture and sculpture, about as many years in each area. And more recently, in 2018, I retired from Florida A&M School of Architecture. So I'm retired. I'm a retired artist. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that in my career, I was able to kind of in my midlife switch over and teach architecture. It was almost like getting another degree. I only taught first year because I'm not an architect. I got my foot in the door as a shop. They hired me as faculty, but I was in charge of the shop. And I loved that because my husband and I were building a house. And so I built all the furniture. I did all the cabinets and the drawers and the doors and all the woodworking, while Charles, who was a metal sculptor, as I was or am also, he worked with metal. And so anyway, that's pretty much who I am. I continue to work, and I did my undergraduate in painting and drawing and my graduate in sculpture. So I love all media.
And I'm really looking forward to that diversity in your work and in your life really getting into this conversation, because I've found that, you know, in a lot of the episodes, it's very metal fabrication heavy, and that's great. But it's not always applicable to everybody's life. And so I'm really excited about the conversation to come. So let's dive maybe a little bit into your childhood. Do you have any childhood memories that you think that was something that really affected me and maybe influenced you to become who you are today?
I do have stories. I think that perhaps the thing that was most important for me was I came from a family of artists, and grandparents, aunts. It was typical to go and visit a relative and walk into a house full of paintings and color and smells of oil paints. I had a great aunt who was, when I was 8, she was 88, and she read palms. She learned, she actually went to Pratt to art school, and she was a great artist. But in the Depression, she read palms. And when I was a kid, she read my sister's palm and told my sister how she had this great creative line, a creativity line in her hand. And so when she read my palm, she didn't say anything about me being creative. And here I was in this wonderful environment. And I said, well, what about my creativity? And she said, well, it's there. It's just not developed yet. And that changed because I'm like, I'm gonna, do this.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be poor. I didn't want to suffer. So, I started school when I was 4, and I graduated when I was 16. And I did 2 years of college in 1 year.
Wow.
When I was 17, I went to Paris. My parents didn't send me. I worked as a grocery store checker for 2 years and saved my money. And I went to Paris and studied at the Sorbonne and La Sorbonne and the Alliance Française. I studied French. Mm-hmm. And, when I left Gainesville, where I grew up, I took my little box of oil paints and my brushes to Paris. And I thought I wanted to be a clothing designer because I had won 2 sewing contests in high school. And I had this ability to make clothes without even patterns. So it was an ability to see 3-dimensionally. And so I always thought I was going to be a fashion designer, but I came back from Paris and enrolled at the University of Florida in Gainesville in painting and drawing. And so I got my degree and immediately moved to the Bay Area and lived in Marin County for the next 4 years. So that was in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And I was a painter. I was going to go to California and get my graduate degree in painting. And I took a couple of classes at the Academy of Art College in San Francisco. And I took sculpture classes at College of Marin. And College of Marin was the school where Robin Williams got his notary. He started.
Okay.
And it had a lot of money. It was in Kentfield, California. And we had a little speedy melt and a really nice facility, okay, for a community college. And I was good at modeling. I liked it and I was good at it. And I started doing casting and fell in love with the whole foundry process. My first teachers were Ron Young, who is the patina guru. He started Sculpt Nouveau, and he was the director of the Academy of Art College for years before he retired. And then also Richard Miller, who was the sculptor for George Lucas, late 70s Star Wars, the very first Star Wars. He made a helmet, and they took this helmet that he made, and they made 80 helmets from the one. Okay. And they cast it in plastic to look like metal. And that was really, a learning experience for me, who I thought everything had to be in metal or else it just wasn't worthy. But those were my formative years. Ron Young actually got me interested because he had just returned one year. He had returned from the Johnson Atelier Technical Institute of Sculpture in Princeton, New Jersey. And he brought some work with him. He brought some people with him from the atelier. And I had no idea, I'd never heard of this place. And at the time, I had been going every year. I'd go to New York for my annual art infusion. Okay, I'd go look at all the galleries and check out everything that was happening in New York, museums. And that year, I took the train from New York to New Jersey to Princeton, and I met the then director, Herc Van Tonkeren, and he accepted me. Had a page of slides. We used slides in those days. And he accepted me. So a month later, I went back to California and moved to New Jersey, just like that.
Wow.
And yeah, it was an incredible facility. It was everything that College of Marin had, but it was bigger and better. They were doing, 30-foot long castings. And it was huge, and it was vibrant, and all the sculptors, everybody who was anybody came to the atelier to do casting. And so that experience, it was at the time when I was there, which was 1979 to 1980, I was there just for a year. It was a 2-year program, and they tried to make the Johnson Atelier into a school. And you got a certificate, but we all thought it was sort of slave labor, and we made $3 an hour and punched a clock, and came home just dead tired doing foundry all day long. So it was I knew that I would go there for a year and learn everything that I could, and then go to grad school in sculpture. And so that's what I did. And the atelier was phenomenal because I met people like Georgia O'Keeffe and Juan Hamilton. I actually worked on one of her pieces, from modeling enlarging. It went into sand molding. And then I went through the whole process with one of her sculptures. And it was about that time that one of the department heads, Paul McMahill, who later worked for Talix, and he's in upstate New York and has his own foundry. But Paul McMahill suggested that I write a paper on iron casting. And the atelier, we cast everything. We cast nickel, we cast aluminum, bronze, stainless. You name it, we cast it. And we were casting iron, and I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but we were doing it in a speedy melt. But we had all kinds of problems because it was, you couldn't cast very thin. You had to, we were casting a lot in ceramic shell, and it would break, when you would try to divest it, it would, so we just had all kinds of problems. And so I did a bunch of research that I took that on as my project, was iron casting, and arranged for a bunch of us, including John Lash, who was then head of ceramic shell. We all went to a foundry, a local foundry, where they tested our metal, and they told us what we needed to add. We needed to add sorel to our pig iron, and when we got better iron. But I can't remember my first iron. I do remember my first piece because it was super thin. I can tell you the first iron from a cupola that I remember.
Okay. Is that at this point in the story, or should we?
No.
Yeah.
No,
so save it and tell me that. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's interesting to me because as I'm going to just give a little you a little, because I'm thinking about there's so much that I don't know.
Sure.
There's so much that I don't know. Like the fact that iron really isn't that special, but it is. Do you know what I mean? It is. And like what
Yeah.
we kind of have this grassroots, like this cast iron artist through the cupola and the building and the community and the you
Sure.
know, this like gritty sculpture, but it's like iron in industry is no big deal at all. And so it's kind
No
of
big deal.
sometimes every once in a while it strikes me that like some people don't think it's all that big of a deal. Like, there's people that work in foundries that cast iron all the time, and they're not driving
Sure.
on their one vacation day to Iowa, and so every
Sure.
once in a while I'm like, yeah, you were casting iron and it was just like any other metal. So anyways.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think I remember the nickel casting. We did this big nickel casting for Johnson, Seward Johnson, called, I think it was King Lear. I can't remember, but I remember, the nickel, we were casting nickel and we had no idea about how toxic it was. After we did all that stuff, OSHA came in and they made us wear completely suits and all this stuff, but that was after. So, we did so much casting. And when you were in foundry, if you were in the foundry department, you just cast all day long. And there were times, I mean, that's when I started to learn how to drink beer, was at the atelier. I hated beer. It's like, God, this stuff is awful. And it was Rolling Rock and Wiedemann's. I mean, horrible, horrible. But they would come with this case of beer at the end of the workday, and you'd be so hot.
Yeah.
And it would just be so cold. And oh my gosh. I mean, it's no wonder that foundry workers are beer drinkers.
Yeah.
Now, the atelier was a very interesting place. There was only about 20 apprentices, and we worked. I remember working like all day. One time, I worked with a jackhammer with ceramic shell. Okay,
wow.
To get the ceramic shell off. And we would be in this room and you'd be all suited up, okay, because it'd be a sandblasting room, and you would blast, and then you'd use a jackhammer, and then you'd blast. And I remember going home and my hands were just like this. I woke up the next day and I couldn't open my hands. Yeah. So I'm very concerned about the nature of just people being safe and around foundry, and all the toxic, all the fumes, all the stuff, the respiratory, it's something that people really, really should take note of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also it's like the physical tear, like wear and tear on your body, just feel it. We feel it the day after an iron pour or mixing lots of sand, and then you feel it. Yeah. Well, so you had plans to complete a year there and then go to grad school. So is that
exactly what I did?
Okay.
And while I was doing my research on cast iron, I came across a professor, Tom Walsh, in Illinois, who wrote a paper on casting iron out of a cupola. And I was like, who would do that? I mean, how would you? So I can't remember if Tom came to the atelier. We had so many people. I mean, so many people that came to the atelier. I got to meet, George Siegel, for example. He lived in New Jersey, and he did he did all the plaster figurative work, and then he wanted to cast it in bronze and do a white patina. So at the time when he was working at the atelier, he would come in and do his own patina, and I was working in patina with Ron Young. I was in that area. And so I got to work right there alongside George Siegel. So those kind of experiences, getting to meet and work right alongside of someone like Nancy Graves, when you're young, and she was kind of like, oh, wow, she's really good. And so it's nice when you can, you have those role models to look up to. So the atelier was a really, really good thing. And I was happy that I had that experience, but then it was time for me to leave and go to grad school. So it was funny. Tom Walsh said, you have to come, and you have to come here before I will accept you. You have to look at the school. You have to look at the facility. And I knew that I was going there. And so I filled up my truck with all my stuff, not all my stuff, half of my stuff. And I drove to Carbondale. And I brought this casting that I did at College of Marin. It was one of the first castings that I ever did. And I was so proud of it because it was a hand. I made a mold of my hand, and I took an old lace glove, and I cut the lace glove and put it over the wax. I made my hand in a wax that was dissolvable.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I put it, they do have a water soluble wax.
Mm-hmm.
And I cast, and then I put the glove over that, and then I cast it in a centrifuge. I had to cast it in 2 pieces because it was so small, and it was so delicate because it was a lace glove.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And anyway, I took that to him, and he said, "You're accepted." And
good.
And so I did my graduate work with Tom Walsh in Carbondale, and there was about 20 graduate students. And I loved it because I had my own studio, and it was about a 10 by 10 little cubicle, but it was my first own studio.
Yeah.
And we never did for iron at all the 3 years I was there in Carbondale.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had 2 iron pieces that I had cast from the atelier. We never did do iron, but we poured everything else, and we made, I think they built, after I left Carbondale in 1983, they built a cupola.
Okay.
After I left.
Yeah.
Then I got my first teaching job out of grad school at Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
And being that this was the state that I was born and where my parents lived, I was really thrilled to go back to Florida. And I taught with Charles Hook, and we fell in love. And I got a second teaching job, which was a better job. I was head of sculpture at Eastern Illinois University. And so I took it. I wanted to go for my career, and
yeah.
Charles was still married, and I wanted him to sort of sort out his life. And then I figured, well, if it's meant to be, we'll get together. And so I moved to Eastern Illinois University and assumed teaching all sculpture and the graduate program.
Mm-hmm.
I was the only one, and we had no foundry. And so it was funny because when I moved from graduate school to Florida State, we had a speedy melt. We did casting. I started ceramic shell there.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And but we did a lot of investment casting. It was,
mm-hmm.
We only started doing sand casting after we started doing iron.
Okay.
At Florida State. But when I moved to Eastern Illinois, we had no foundry, nothing.
Wow.
So
okay.
my students would make their molds. We would use a wheelbarrow and a shovel, and we would make sand molds. And we would take them to, they were in town in Charleston. At the time, there was a little green sand foundry, and they let us cast. They loved it. I love that. My whole life I've worked with industry, and I've got donations. And I hate to tell people that, because I used to tell everybody, and then everybody started asking industry for donations, and then it kind of leveled off. But I've always been really good at, like, okay, if I want something, I'm going to figure out a way to do it and, get it done.
Yeah.
So I took my students to WashU. I took them to Edwardsville. I took them to Terre Haute. We went to Champaign. We went all over the area. We went back down to see Tom Walsh many times, and we would bring our molds, and we would come back happy with our castings.
Yes.
And then I married Charles. And before we actually got married in 1988, and that was kind of a pivotal year for me, because we'd always gone to conferences and workshops, and just to meet other artists, other sculptors.
Yeah.
And I was invited to give a talk at a Mid-America College Art Conference, and it was contemporary figurative sculpture. And I was doing performance and making life-size castings that I wore, and crazy stuff. And so I presented, and after my presentation, Wayne Potras came up and introduced himself, and from the University of Minnesota.
Yeah.
And Wayne, sweetheart of a man, said, "You need to come to our iron pour this year and bring some students." And I went, okay, and that was the 13th, his 13th annual.
Okay.
And he let me do the first tap. So this is the first iron pour that I remember.
Wow.
Was Wayne had me do the first tap, and I was so scared. You know how you're like, oh my God, what if it doesn't do?
Yeah.
What if it doesn't? And he's like, oh, come on. Yeah. So anyway, that was a fabulous experience. Herc Van Tongeren, who was the director of the atelier, and at the time, I think he was the director at the time. He was the visiting artist that year. So it was really interesting for me to go to this new place. And if anybody's ever gone to the University of Minnesota and seen their facility, it's the most impressive facility, that I think I've ever seen. They just a lot of money. Okay. So that was, I came back after that, and I said, Charles, next year for the 14th, you have to go back to the 14th annual pour at the University of Minnesota. And so Charles went with me, and I was teaching in Illinois. He was in Florida. We would, that's what we did.
Yeah.
And so we went, and we met, and the visiting artist that year was George Beasley from Georgia State.
All right.
Another wonderful man with so much knowledge, and just, these are people that are near and dear to my heart. George was the visiting artist, and he did an art performance, poured a cross, I think. I can't even remember, but it was quite an experience. And Charles, my husband, Charles Hook, when he saw and met George, he said, I met you when I was a grad student at WashU, and you were a grad student at Cranbrook with Julia Smith. And I saw you on a burning scaffolding, pouring iron, and you didn't stop. And it was like true story.
Yeah.
Okay. And George has been doing that ever since, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we had a wonderful time. And those are the only two, unfortunately, those are the only two of Wayne's iron pours that we went to, because we started doing it too.
Yeah.
So that year in 1988 was pivotal. That was also the year of the first International Iron Conference.
Okay.
And so Charles in Florida and me in Illinois, we converged, and I brought a truckload of stuff because we were married that year.
Oh, yeah.
And so, so anyway, we went to the first conference, and I was I've always been about molding.
Mm-hmm,
I feel like that's my area of expertise.
Yeah.
And so, because I had started out with ceramic shell and these just really great programs, there was a guy who also had gone to the atelier that I knew that started his own ceramic shell business. It is no longer in business, called Shell Spin. And Shell Spin would stay in suspension. So you could whip it up and you could coat your shells. And there was a little waste, and it was probably a little bit more expensive. But if you didn't want to
have the
worry and have to keep this, and you're doing small batches, it worked great. Yeah. So I got Sean Colson to donate Shell Spin, and I did a little workshop at the first international. And that was such a sweet conference because it was so little. And there wasn't very many people. We could all get together and do a group photo, it was a small conference. Yeah. And I met Julius Smith, who was a wonderful man. He was a ladies' man. So he liked ladies. Mm-hmm. It was just fun. We just all had fun. And all those guys were so helpful and welcoming. And I always have been like a sort of a pioneer woman, mm-hmm. I was the first bartender in California. They didn't have women bartenders. And I'm like, what, in Florida? That's all we have. Or what, we're out there. And what? You don't have women bartenders? I mean, I always felt like I was, welding and foundry and, working in these jobs that were really not really meant for women. And so, you had to kind of forge ahead. And these guys were just like, so open-armed and so helpful, and just taught me everything I needed to know about being a teacher, really. Wow. So anyway, that was my first iron experience. And then after Charles and I got married in 1988, in October, I was 3 months pregnant, and Charles built me a cupola for my birthday because I wanted a cupola. Yeah. After all of that. And so we had George Beasley came down from Atlanta, and Butch Jack came from Beaumont, Texas. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of other people, that came to help. And it was, they helped us. And otherwise, we probably wouldn't have had any iron at all. Mm-hmm. And they got us going. And after that, Charles built 14 cupolas all over the United States and in Europe. And we kind of took that. And, earlier you were saying how casting iron allows you the ability to travel. Yeah. Well, we used iron to travel and teach and make cupolas and teach people how to do it, because I think, quite frankly, the reason that the iron movement became so big, and it was primarily people like Tom Gipe, from Edwardsville, mm-hmm. and Wayne Potraz and George Beasley, and Julius Smith, and there's a whole host of other people. A whole host.
Oh yeah.
But those guys really pushed And the reason it took off, I think, is because bronze is expensive.
Yeah.
Molding materials are expensive.
Yeah.
Aluminum, I like aluminum personally. It's just light, but it's kind of cheap, you know?
Yeah.
Iron is really cheap.
Yeah.
So when you get free materials or almost free, and you're going to the scrapyard and getting scrap iron and melting it down, you feel like, hey, I'm recycling. This is wonderful. I'm making iron a good thing. And the whole, I mean, I think foundry, whether you're pouring iron, aluminum, stainless, it doesn't matter what you're pouring. It's a group effort.
Yes.
And you have to have a group of people. Just like I think when you do performance, and that's why I think art became so performative, is because you need a group. And when you teach and you're in an educational facility, or you're working staff or whatever, you're in a university situation, you have a labor force. You have people that like minds that want to get the job done, and you can do it. And that's what I loved about performance. I did a lot of performance, and I drew from the dance department, from the theater department. I got all these people together, and it was just so much fun until I wasn't teaching anymore. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I remember I moved to Florida after I got married, and Art Papers in Chicago, which was really big at the time.
Okay.
They contacted me and they wanted me to come up to Atlanta and do an art performance. And I said, no, I'm pregnant. And they go, that's perfect. And I go, no. No. That's not what my performance is about. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
So I kind of fell out of performance, because I didn't have that, that workforce. So I think that it's a natural thing that iron sort of took off like it did in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And it continues today.
Yeah. It's like, I feel like with the social media now and this connectivity, there's been an explosion. It's and to the point where now I'm doing this podcast so that, I can put it out on the internet and whoever wants to listen can feel connected or learn more about, the founders of the movement. So.
Yeah. So, we did at FSU, and I say I didn't teach for 5 years, and I was lucky. I mean, I had a little one, and I worked. Oh my gosh. I mean, I worked. I think in the early 90s, and our resumes were pretty full up because we were doing things. We were working. But I wasn't working and pulling in a paycheck. So every year we started out doing an annual iron pour, and then we did it twice a year. We would do a pig roast every year, and we would sell tickets, and people would come and eat and watch the iron pour and have a big meal afterwards. And we would get kegs of beer, and it just was a big party. It really was. And we had a place. We didn't do it on campus.
Okay.
We did it in an art park, Railroad Square Art Park. And we did that every year in sort of this big area. And we had staging, and we had all kinds of stuff. We had community support. Like people came out and they knew about the iron pour and whole scratch block thing. I mean, and it was kind of it was a great thing. But I'll tell you what, we both lamented that what happened in terms of education is a lot of times students would not really do a whole lot, during the semester, and then they get real busy right before the iron pour and crank out a couple of pieces. And we would always call them Barbie dolls.
Yeah.
Because it'd be like a shoe or okay, what passed. And we just would always go like, I mean, in a way, yes, this is great because we energize people and we get people going, but then we're casting all this shit.
Yeah.
So, it's sort of it's a hard thing. But I think once Charles died, he died in 2008, and we had gone to the International Cast Iron Conference in Wales, in Kidwelly, Wales, that year, and he was sick, and that we'd also. Anyway, it was good. That was our last conference together.
Yeah.
I did one after that in Latvia, and elected not to go to Berlin, mainly because of COVID. And I thought it was Berlin was like, I went to Scotland instead.
Yeah.
I flew into Glasgow. I didn't even want to fly into London. I was one of these terrified COVID people.
Well, I think a lot of people had a lot of different feelings during that time.
Yeah. So I don't know what else. Charles, I never built a cupola. Charles, I never had to. I never wanted. It wasn't anything that I knew all about it. I knew how to run it. I could really care less about all that stuff. Are you kidding me? To get up and, charge a cupola? I mean, I believed in hard work,
yes.
But I also, one time at FSU, they always used to, and this was back in the day, and I think a lot of people did this. They used to drink, and people would drink and drink and drink beer. And I finally got to the point where I said, I'm not going to go to an iron pour. If you're going to drink beer before the iron pour, you have to wait till after it's over, because this young lady she was breaking iron, and she didn't have a helmet on, a face shield on, and she broke her 2 front teeth out, totally just knocked them out.
Yeah.
And so like when something like that happens as a young girl, and it's the rest of her life, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So, there are certain things that I just kind of drew the line. It was that kind of woman.
A woman thing. But I also feel like it's common sense. I feel like to an extent, and sometimes when we're excited and we're passionate and we want to let people do what they want to do, we don't want to be controlling over anybody. Sometimes things in tough situations can kind of happen, and then that is okay, this doesn't fly anymore. And I think that there's a couple of other stories that I've heard of bad accidents happening. And so now I think that probably the universal standard is after everybody drops bottom and the tools are away. That was Jimbo's thing, is he wanted to put away like anything that was, because at UGA we would pour in that courtyard. And so he was like, anything that anybody would come in and steal, we have to put away, put all the shovels away, all of the, blowers, everything. It has to be in the building, and then shut the door before we could even have the celebratory, beer or two, and then go down the street to the pub. Like, but he also liked to pour in the morning. And not everybody likes to pour in the morning. Sure. But in Georgia, you got to get it done at the beginning of the day, unless it's like maybe October or something, but it gets so hot. You don't want to be running a furnace at 1 p.m.
I know.
And it's too hot. So, but I think that those standards are necessary to just, we can't start partying until we have earned the celebration.
So, after I don't even think I made anything when I went to, well, yeah, I did. I can't say that. I did. Maybe that was my last iron, was I poured in Latvia. I have so much work. I think one of the things that I would like to say, that I think because my husband and I were both sculptors. When he died, I wanted to give everything to to an institution. And I had no idea that was so hard. And I tried, and I got like a zero, like nobody wanted anything. And you have to pay in order to maintain stuff. And so, now I'm almost 70 and I've got all this work. And I talk to a lot of people that are in my shoes that are older, like Tom Hall. She said he and Linda, they have a basement full of metal. And if that's one thing, if you work and work and work and work, eventually
you have a lot of work.
You have a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I never cared. I mean, I have to say, I'm really fortunate because my parents supported me to be an artist.
Yeah.
They didn't, I'll take that back. My parents wanted to send me to law school. Mm-hmm. They did not want to send me to art school. And I said, okay, I'll do it on my own. And I did. I got an assistantship and I went to, and they were really proud of me that I did all of that. And they were very proud. And so I think in the long run, they did support me as an artist. But one of the things that I think been the most important thing about my career, it's also probably been the most crushing, is I'm a terrible manager of, I don't care about selling. I'm just not a good business person. And I'm not I'm not out there socially. So I think nobody knows about me. I think I just like create and I don't know, but it's been a gift because I always wondered about artists that got stuck and they had to make the same thing because that's what they were known for, like Deborah Butterfield and her horses or George Sell and his plaster figures, it's like you get stuck.
Yeah.
And so I think as a kid, I was a little ADD because I would, beg for a guitar. And once I learned how to play it, I'd give it up. I just wanted to learn. And then once I learned, it's like, okay, did that. Mm-hmm. And sculpture was the first thing. I mean, even painting was easy. I could do a painting in a day. And I was probably more successful as a painter, in terms of selling. But it wasn't until I started doing sculpture that I realized that there was just so much. It was endless in terms of materiality, in terms of technique, in terms of everything. I mean, even what people are doing today is just so phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the mixture of media. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but when I was in undergrad at University of Florida, mm-hmm. I brought in a piece, and it was a mixed media little sculpture, and I had a light and metal, and I was so excited, and my teacher blasted me because it was mixed media. Oh. And I cried. Mm. And you know what it's like when you're in college and you cry.
Yeah.
And I went home and I'm like, oh, and so my mother cut out of the newspaper this article about how education curbs your creativity. And I went back and I gave it to my teacher the next day. And I think that was another one of those little experiences that was like, that he's wrong. I can mix media, and I've been doing it ever since. And I one of the things that I loved about casting was mixing metals, mixing, iron and bronze and stainless and bronze and just mixture of metals. I guess since I decided a long time ago, if I'm going to do casting, if I'm going to go through all of that work and all of that money, I'm going to do it in a metal that is going to last and that isn't going to break and that isn't going to be heavy. Um, so I kind of got away from the fragility. I got tired of things breaking.
Yeah.
You know, I would send things off to a gallery and they would get there, they would show beautifully, and they'd send them back and it'd be a box of pieces.
Yeah.
And so I just, after a while you get a little bit jaded. I love metal for the color. I like it for its strength. I like it for its relationship to the earth. I think all of those things are super important. Iron, we're made of iron mostly. And so I think it has a place. I certainly have loved all of my experiences with it. And now all I want to do is make small little things that are, that don't take up a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
My husband, Charles, did huge sculptures. It was nothing for him to do a 22-foot long, a 24-foot long sculpture. And he taught me a lot about fabrication and working large. And we did it. We both went all over the country with our art and showed it all over. I mean, it was just a really great experience. And it was great, going to Europe and making art and showing it there and leaving it there. And it's all part of your resume and it's all wonderful stuff. But at the end of the day, when you're sitting back and you're reflecting, as this podcast has made me do, it's made me go back and think about all these people out of my past and, and where I was then and who I was as a young woman sculptor, and who I am now. And I'm much wiser. And, I feel like I'm grateful for all the people, the community of artists that I have gotten to know in my life. And, that support that you get.
Yeah.
And especially at the conferences and stuff, and you see old friends, it's really wonderful. So it's not like I'm done and I'm finished.
Yeah.
By any means. I actually, right now in my studio, I'm taking apart. I took apart a sculpture that I cast in 1991,
Mm-hmm.
and it was about 4 foot high by 10 by 10, and I'm collapsing the whole thing, and I'm putting it on a wall.
Oh, yeah.
And it has a big mirror, so I think it will work really, really well. And I'm smarter, then I made things that were too fragile to go outside, too risky, too big to go inside. I mean, I made things like, where would you put this? I didn't care. And so I would say that for people to think about those things and not just make Barbie dolls, don't just make stuff to make stuff,
Yeah.
But I think I can look at all my work and, some were good, some were not so good. And you hang on to that because it's your work and it represents time.
Mm-hmm.
But I have taken truckloads of metal and sculptures to the scrapyard.
Yeah.
And feel empowered by it because it had a life. And I'm also at that point in my life where I'm going to take care of this stuff. So I'm not going to leave all my dirty work for somebody else to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a gift.
Yeah. Well, I came with I had 10 years of everybody dying around me, from my parents, my husband, my cousin. I mean, I had to go to Ecuador. I mean, I just had just too much, and when that happens and you all of a sudden, you wouldn't believe, Laura, I must have 60 hammers,
yeah,
60 clamps. I mean, I know I'm not alone here.
yeah.
You know, my husband collected tools. My father collected tools. My grandfather, who was a boat builder, he collected tools. And who has all those tools? I collected tools. I have all those tools. And that's what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to polish them up, clean them up, sell a few. I don't want to go into the scrapyard, you know?
No, yeah.
Move them, try to make some sense out of all this stuff. So I think I have since the pandemic, I have been working with encaustics and wax.
Yeah.
And I think I loved wax modeling and wax work, wax welding, wax chasing, wax patterns. Loved. Okay. I never liked sand and wax because it would react. I mean, you know, kind of.
Yeah.
But sand came later in my life. It came to more with iron casting, you know, and the fact that it was so much cheaper. But I love wax, and I had bees for a while. I have chickens and bees, and you know, my little farm here in Florida. And so I love beeswax. I like the smell of it, and it's not a petroleum product. And so I can make my own encaustic, and I love, this must be because of my experiences that I had with Ron Young with the patination. I went to Peru and sought out natural dyes in the Umbra Valley and used them for years and years on my iron castings, and dyes that's where it's at. And so Ron gave me that, and I really loved. I think because I was a painter, I started out as a painter, and I really got into drawing when I taught architecture, because that was something that I had to teach. Was, you know, I made my students have a journal, keep a journal. And we drew every day. And students that would say, I can't draw, Miss LaGrasse. At the end of the semester, they would say, I can draw.
I can draw now.
And so I really did come back around. I think you can't tend to do that in your life. You know, I always said when I got older, I'd go back to color, and I would go back to drawing and painting. And so the encaustics I'm doing wall relief, and I need to put them on my website. So I haven't done anything in 3 years. I've not even looked at it, but I'm going to put them on my website soon. And I want to get 20. I think I've got 18. Okay. And they all have sculpture embedded in the wax. And I've gotten into sewing. So I sew with metal through the board, and I attach my pieces. And so every single one of them is 3-dimensional. I think all of them have metal or leather. I got into leather working for a while. I like mixed media.
Yeah. So, I love hearing about it. I mean, I feel like it's freeing, because you can literally any material that you want to grab, because it serves the purpose that you're reaching for, to get it in there.
Yeah. Well, I have to say one last thing that I think is important. When I was in grad school, you know, you have to have your grad committee, and you have to do your thesis. And my committee, I was into performance art, and I did a big performance. It cost so much money. I did life-size castings that were motorized. And people like Rebecca Horn, you know, who was doing motorized and working with science and stuff, that she was my idol at the time. And nobody did performance art in the Midwest. Nobody. People were like, why are you doing this? What is it? Nobody knows anything about this. Why are you doing it? I had one of my committee members say, why does everything have to be cast bronze? And I said, because this is about defense mechanisms, and metal is probably, like, to me, that's like defensive, metal.
Yes.
And so I was making helmets and making body armor kind of stuff, and trying to figure it out, like why I was doing all this stuff. And then performance, it led into performance. And this one of my committee members, and I had people from dance and film, and he said, "Why does everything have to be out of metal?" And I was just like, well, because I mean, that's what I do. That's what I love, and it represents this. And so I got through all of that, but I thought about that. You know how sometimes somebody will say one thing, and you think about it later, and you think, why wasn't I doing what my first sculpture teacher, Richard Miller, who worked for George Lucas and Star Wars, why wasn't I doing what he was doing, at the same time? I was making these big, heavy metal things that I had to motorize and wear or fit into. And now I have all that stuff. I have it. I've sold some of it, but most of it I have. And I go, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's okay. It represents a period of time that I was super passionate about art performance, and I kind of found my niche for 10 years. I did that. I took it around the country, and I loved it. I just loved that. The fact that I could mix all of these things and lighting, and do it in a theater where there was lighting, and it just was. That was fun. Yeah. And I think, if you can make art fun, and that's what I feel like I'm doing with mime caustics. But I think if I were trying to chase down the iron, it wouldn't be fun. I think that's a chapter in my life that I'm proud of, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And I feel like I was kind of a pioneer in a way. But I'm also, I feel like I can say, that's behind me, and I can, utilize all of that stuff, everything that I've learned, in new, innovative ways that don't have to be big and heavy and fragile.
Yes. And also, just a side tangent, but if you step back and think about all of the people who, through your traveling around and teaching them how to make a cupola, and then I'm assuming you probably had to teach them how to make sand molds.
Oh, yeah,
if they didn't have a ceramic shell, or those people, you played probably a larger role in their life than you'll ever know. In the spreading of the knowledge. And I interviewed Steve Daly.
Sure.
And he has kind of like a similar attitude. He's retired. He actually, I can't remember exactly when he said the last time that he poured iron was, but the thing is, it doesn't matter.
No,
it doesn't matter. Well, what matters is he took that furnace from Cranbrook, and then it, helped the spread. And you're one of those names that will go down in history as helping the movement spread when it was young.
Yeah. I sometimes I lament about teaching, all the teaching, and you want to do something that's super important in your life. And, when I look at my art, and I'm going, oh my God, it's like, it's like weight, it's weighting me down. But, teaching, you're doing the same thing, when you teach, and it doesn't matter what you're teaching. If you're teaching foundry, if you're teaching sculpture, you're teaching architecture, it doesn't really matter. You're imparting your knowledge and your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And your gift, what you have. And I always tell students, because, when you teach, you listen to what students have to say about other faculty. And I always I would always listen to the students, and I'd always tell them, you can always learn something. For everybody has something to give.
Yes.
And some teachers are going to be better, but your education is not going to be like the person next to you. It's like soup, and it's what you put into it, right? All those different things is what you get out of it. So I think it's a noble profession, and I think it's a noble thing. I think it's a noble thing what you're doing. To keep just to. I can't tell you how many people, I mean, you can see it. The world is so small. I mean, you get on the internet and you start looking and you realize how small the world is and how much is out there and how many talented people there are. And it makes you feel humble, and it makes you feel good, too, to know that you're kind of a part of it. You're a part of this web that continues to change and grow. And somebody recently was saying, well, I don't know, we were talking about politics, and they said, well, these people just want to take us back to the way it used to be. And I said, never. We're not ever going to go back to the way it used to be. I mean, we can't. We can only go forward and change and evolve. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of this, really. I mean, just with art in general. Right?
Yeah.
I've seen it change.
I was going to say that because I think that you've probably seen amazing things and amazing leaps and bounds, and then also regressions, and there's the ebb and flow of a lot of things. So one thing that you're kind of, I feel like I can understand, or well, I don't know how to say this really, but you keep kind of talking about you're moving on to lighter materials and in the encaustics, and you have moved away from the metal work. And so I'm at this point right now where in my life, in my artistic career, and now you've talked about you're not really a business artist. You're not selling your work. You never really did. And I'm kind of the same way. I went through a phase where I was going to be a art fair artist. And you probably remember a time in the 80s when being an art fair artist was a career, because my professor in undergrad, that's how he made his living in the 80s, was just going from art fair to art fair to art fair to art fair. And so he would tell stories about that. And I thought in the 2000s that it's not the same, and it won't ever be the same. And it's like the money isn't different, the interest isn't different. And then also with the internet, you can see a lot of things, now Etsy has gone up and then gone down, and people are on Instagram. But I feel like in the 80s and in the 90s, you go to the art fair to see the art because you couldn't see it on the internet. Anyway, so that's just my perception.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
Or maybe I'm in the ballpark. Or like, that's just kind of how I theorized, sort of. But the point that I'm getting at, which is kind of not really related to that at all, but I've gotten to this point in my artistic career where I've realized that for me, it's not the end product that gets me excited. It's the time in my studio working with the materials that I love. And so having a whole pile of iron castings that are unfinished, because I really love the sand mold making process and I love going to iron pours, but then the grinding, that's not a process that I enjoy. And so I think that I'm now realizing, now I've been out of grad school for a while, so I've been without instruction. I haven't been without direction, but I've been without professors shaping me. And like, I have an artist community. My husband is an artist as well. And I'm going around to these iron pours and seeing all of my artist friends and things, but I don't have like a daily, artist making in my studio practice, really. And that's okay, because that's where I am in my life and my career. But when I do get into my studio, it's really the time that's there and working is more important than the finished product. And I think that is something to be said when you're talking about materials. Is it's like, it almost doesn't matter what material it is, as long as you're enjoying it and you're enjoying working with the materials in that time. Did your husband just get home?
Yeah.
You can say hi to him. It's okay.
He was going, Deborah.
I know, right before we got on this call, my husband, so I go to the exercise at the gym. I got home from the gym and my husband goes, my parents are going to be here. They're coming to visit.
Oh, wow.
in like an hour. And I was like, I have an interview. I'm going to be interviewing. So I don't this is my priority but in his defense, I didn't tell him, we are together, but we have separate lives, and and so he was like, oh, but they can't come tomorrow. So they're dropping off something. It's all fine. But it was just like, okay, that's,
sure.
This is different, it's just the dynamics of a partnership. She's like, oh, okay, well, so anyways, so I think do you want to cover any of the rest of your journey until now? I kind of feel like we did. I feel like we talked about a lot of kind of theory of artistic practice, and, you really covered your studio, your artistic practice's journey. Really well.
I think the one thing that I have always been about the art. Okay. The casting, the technical part of it. It's like anybody can draw, right? Anybody can draw if you practice.
Yeah.
And you want to do it. And I think anybody can be a good technician, and you can pour iron or whatever, what metal. So for me, my journey has always been about the art. But I think one of the things that I said that I've reflected on since I've retired, particularly because I'm not teaching anymore, is the fact that I've always been about the art and not so much about, the running of the child. Okay. When Charles and I would travel abroad, for example, in 2004, I wrote and got an ArtsLink grant to go to Bosnia, to go to Sarajevo, Bosnia. And they still had landmines from the war in Sarajevo. So it was, my parents weren't happy that we were going to Sarajevo, but I wrote a grant to go and do an iron pour there and teach them. And it was so much fun because I got the grant. And so we had to do it. We had to go.
Yeah.
And I bought leathers and face shields and gloves and spats. And it was just fun buying all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and I did it on a shoestring. I bought all used stuff, right? Bought it on eBay and packed up a big suitcase and took all of that stuff. And then I had a suitcase to bring back things.
Yeah.
But we went to Sarajevo, and the Academy of Art College, and they had done a little casting here and there, this whole thing about iron, they didn't know anything about it. And so Charles got busy building the cupola, and I got busy with all the students and making patterns and we talked to them and, gave lectures and stuff before. And a week later, we had an iron pour. We had 2 both television stations.
Wow.
It rained like crazy.
Oh.
We put it in the rain,
Yeah.
and absolutely everything came out beautiful. I mean, it was, except for my casting.
Oh.
And I had made, it was a gift to the school. It was unfortunate because it was a relief of their school. And it had, the Academy of Art, Sarajevo on it, and everybody signed it. And
yeah,
it was one of those things where they poured a drop and then let off. And so mine was the only one that didn't get poured. But that experience was phenomenal. I mean, phenomenal to go, to Eastern Europe and, to take that kind of technology to them was great.
Yeah. And I saw on your resume that there was a Iron Maidens conference. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then I know your husband just got home, so I kind of want to wrap it up for you. And
Iron Maiden was Tansy Ringer, she organized that. And she had a conference. It was in the University of Minnesota and or St. Paul. It wasn't St. Paul, a Catholic school, Catholic university. It wasn't at University of Minnesota, I'm sorry. And it was nice. It was a woman's college and she was teaching there and the students were great. And we had an exhibit and we had a lecture and then that show went around the country, went to Europe. It even came to, I can't remember if it came to Tallahassee or not, the Iron Maiden show, but if it didn't, it went to North Carolina and I was responsible for that because I knew the director there. So that was kind of cool because everybody that was involved was also wanting to see it, travel and so that was a really, really good thing that Tansy did. She's a great sculptor, good friend.
She's on the list. We've been in contact a little bit, just trying to make the connection to get her interview, but then, life happens. But I'm sure I'll have a conversation with her before. Yeah, before too long. Well, in the end of every episode, I ask the guests for some advice. I know you've given us a whole lot of very great advice already, but I was wondering if I could wring one more little gem of advice out of.
I always thought of my castings and as almost like the jewel in a ring. Okay. And I tried to treat them that way, especially when I would fabricate and cast. And I did that for years. I loved fabrication. It was so immediate and, just right there. And then I would look at the casting and that would be the jewel in the ring. That would be the precious object. But the one thing that I think I wish that I had done this myself a little more, and that is take a little bit more time with each piece, and especially with, the meaning, because I think when I was young and impressionable, it was very stylish to be abstract and not tell everything and not really leave some mystery. And so my work has always been deep. I mean, for me, but it hasn't been, I don't know. It's just been recently that I realized that most people, they don't get it. They just don't. They don't look for the symbolism and they don't look for, unless they can look at it and they can see, this is a sculpture of a person, or of a dog or something that's figural. Most people don't spend the time to try to figure it out. And if I talk to people and I say, well, this is what I was thinking, this is what this means. And they go, oh, wow, that's really cool. But I just think that it takes so much time and effort. And sometimes you just want to get things done and you want to move on, you want to get it behind you.
Yeah.
And I think spending a little bit more time, thinking about what it is that you're making, and spending the little bit more time in the making, so that object becomes even more precious, I think is probably what is important, because you and I both know that you can go in the studio and crank out a piece in an hour and it'll be a masterpiece. I mean, you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can work 10 years on something and it can be just a problem.
Yeah.
So it really isn't time. It isn't about time. I'm not saying that spend more time, it's not like bigger is better. Spending more time makes it more. But I think if you're a little bit more committed.
I think I get what you're saying. You're saying
what it is that you're trying to say, and you're trying to communicate, instead of just trying to be different or trying to be unique. I think communication is sort of key, isn't it? And it's important. However you can do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I like to be surprised and I like to be like, oh, wow,
mm-hmm. A little caught off guard a little bit.
Yeah. But I think that would be the thing that I think is, that, and to have fun, really, because life is short and it goes so quickly. And so if it's running around the country and you're going to Music Fest or you're going to Iron Pours, I mean, or you combine the two.
Yeah.
It's, it's your life and you get to design it. You get to do what you want to do. And that's the beauty of being an artist, and in particular, a sculptor. Because I think as a sculptor, you get to orchestrate. You get to design. You get to tell a story. And, or you're a writer or a musician, if you're an artist, that's what you're doing. You're communicating and telling a story. And what better way is there to go through life than to have that gift?
Yeah, I don't know a better way. And I think that is a really great, this idea that the time is more like quality time. Mm-hmm. Spend the quality time with the piece, not necessarily an amount of time, a more amount of time, but that, because this is the life that we have and we got to live it. But being aware, being cognizant of what you're living and what you're doing and what you're achieving is part of being able to enjoy the life that you have.
Yep, I agree.
Well, thank you for that advice. It's fantastic. And I think it's time for us to go on over to the after show, unless you have anything else that you want to.
I don't know that I have anything for the after show.
Oh, I have questions. I have questions for
okay.
you.
Okay. Okay.
That are probably more selfish because I want to know more about, my roots that I just, don't know. So I'm going to say, for the public audience, thank you so much, Deborah, for letting me interview you. This has been a wonderfully educational conversation for me to have. And I think that everybody's and I think that everybody's going to really appreciate hearing your story and your perspective on art. So everybody that's listening and watching, thanks so much for tuning in today. We're going to go on over to the after show. If you want to join us, you know what to do. But if not, we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This conversation, like I said, doesn't have to end here. To gain access to the after show where Deborah and I continue our discussion, visit the website patreon.com/thepodcastiron. And their supporters at any contribution level get access to the after show recordings from each episode that's ever been published. So if you're new here, the after show is just an extra 15 to 20 minutes. sometimes more, with each show's guest, where we talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story behind the privacy of a paywall. So yes, if you sign up now, you'll get to listen to Deborah's after show and all of the other shows for all of the other earlier guests for forever, since the beginning of time. So if you like what I'm doing and you want to support this project, supporting on Patreon is the best way to do it for as little as $1 a month. I mean, you can contribute more, but even just $1 really makes a difference to subsidize the costs that I undertake to make this resource publicly available on Spotify and all of the other podcast hosting websites, and you get the after shows. So it's a win for everyone. Well, in conclusion of this public portion of the episode, I hope you enjoyed listening to Deborah's story as much as I enjoyed talking with her. Hosting this podcast has been an unexpected education and many different things for many different reasons. But getting this one-on-one time with Deborah and with others in her generation has been such a gift, because I feel like I'm being taught how to mature as an artist and how to grow into my life as it continues. Like in school, nobody really taught me how to be a retired artist, and I don't really know what to expect or what makes you really a successful one. But now I'm so grateful to have some information on how others are going about doing this. And I think from their advice and wisdom, I'm also learning how to not miss the important things as they're happening in the moment that they are happening. So I hope some of you listening are getting this benefit as well, but if not, at least you know what I'm getting out of these interviews. And thanks for listening. Deborah, thank you. Thank you. You've helped me fill in some major blank spots in the roots of iron at UGA, as well as other places, but I find I always have a preference leaning towards UGA, and it's just because that's where I learned iron. And so I always knew that you and Charles had helped Jimbo set up iron at UGA, but I didn't know where you learned it from. And I knew that you had gone to Carbondale, but now knowing that you didn't learn it in Carbondale, but you had cast iron before you went to Carbondale, and then finding out that it was actually Wayne getting you to his pour is what got you tapping furnaces. I'm just so happy to know that. And then you were the one getting Charles to go to that conference the next year, and that's when he reconnected with George Beasley, and then he built you a furnace for a gift, and that was so sweet. And then also that's so badass that's what you wanted for a gift. I can't tell you enough how glad I am to know all of this and basically everything that you shared with me. So thank you for telling me. And now, thank you to our top supporters for helping me afford to continue offering this show. Thank you to Crescent Creative for becoming our newest top sponsor of the podcast Iron, and also for demonstrating how artists can create an interesting and inspiring living for themselves by producing custom client work. You are a great role model to many of us. Thank you, Sloss Metal Arts, for being a top supporter of this podcast, and also for your year-round work as a National Center for Iron Casting and Metal Arts, and for offering our community resident artist opportunities. Thank you to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance for being a top supporter of this show, and I'm so honored and encouraged to have your support. Thank you for all of the work that you do in service of the Western region of the U.S. and its cast iron artists. So in closing, thank you also to our individual supporters on Patreon. The funds that everyone there contribute are invaluable to help me continue to produce these episodes. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast Iron on Patreon, I understand. Instead, if you could share this podcast with someone you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps. And for that, I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon. and have a great day.